I thought it'd be really cool to see how we can use social media to have conversations. A few hours in a day or a day where I'm allowed to feel sorry for myself or allow myself to dwell in those emotions, especially where work is concerned, and especially where life is concerned. I think the hardest thing is realizing that irrespective of like how you're feeling, life goes on with or without you because of the deep longing that I had for my mother and because of the deep longing that I had for, my primary caretakers. And that's how my relationship with God started. Welcome to Mindful Mondays. I am in Johannesburg. Yeah, the last time I had a solo episode was in New York, and now it's post my first year in New York, and I decided to do something a little bit different. I wanted to do a reflection episode, but sometimes it's really hard to reflect until you've had a little bit of time. So what I did was ask some of you on social to let me know what you would ask me if you had tea with me. I get a lot of questions or even a lot of requests around mentorship. I get a lot of requests around advising and different things like that. But I thought it'd be really cool to see how we can use social media to have conversations, because sometimes in person doesn't always work. And we know that because of time and now distance. But I thought it'd be really cool to just see what is on your mind and have some tea together. I don't have tea today, but you get what I mean. Have some tea together. So I asked you to send me questions. I got so many questions, some personal, very personal, and some that I have gotten a lot. So I picked 13 of them to be answering today. So let's get into it. So the one question that stood out to me and also made me smile was, what prayers did you pray because you and God seem so close? And that question stood out to me because I think it was 2 days before that, I had this burst of emotion where my heart felt so full and I wanted to cry because I was like, oh my God, I love God so much. Not necessarily because things are going right, but because I felt like God is very data-based driven for me as well. It's not just the love anymore, but it's knowing that there's evidence behind this love as someone who works with data. And I was reflecting on the fact that me today, me alive, me smiling, me feeling joy and accepting joy and allowing joy in has been because of the relationship that I have with God. And I think what's interesting is that when I was about 6, or when I became aware, I'd been going to church for quite a while because of my aunt. But it was different when I started choosing God for myself, not having God imposed on me. And I think what I found that was quite interesting was just when you choose to have conversations with God as a child who has been lonely, I wouldn't say neglected, but obviously my mom had me when she was very young. So I was raised by family members and I was always so grateful, but I was quite a lonely child. And God became my refuge. So I started praying when I was 7, 8, because of the deep longing that I had for my mother and because of the deep longing that I had for, my primary caretakers. And that's how my relationship with God started. I started looking to him to be the father that I needed but didn't have. I started looking to him for hope that one day I'd be able to sit, with my mom and live with her. And that happened. I remember when I finally moved in with my mom, I had Psalm 23 on my door. And, the Lord is my shepherd. I would recite that every single day. And obviously, the older you get, you understand the meaning behind that scripture. Preparing a table before me in the presence, before the presence of my enemies. I'm paraphrasing, but now that I'm older, I understand. But it was quite interesting how God has always been my best friend. He's been the only father that I've known outside of my grandfather, but he's also been my confidant. He's been my refuge. I've cried so many tears knowing that he would catch them and understand what is going on and he would fix everything. I had the deep belief, and I still have the deep belief in my heart. Like when I was younger, I knew that every tear that I cry, God catches it and he looks into my tears to know what's wrong. Obviously now I know that he always knows what's wrong, but do you understand? Like it was such a spiritual experience to interact with God in that way from such a young age. But the prayers that I prayed were less about trying to get closer to God and just having the inherent understanding that he's always there. I think the prayers that were answered the most are not the prayers that I prayed with my eyes closed, but more the prayers that I prayed in conversation with God. As I sit here, I could have a conversation with God right now, eyes opened, as if God is right in front of me. It's the understanding that his presence is that. It's here, it's right now. And that's how I built a relationship. And it was always because God was always listening. And now that I'm older, the evidence is there that God was always listening. So yeah, that's how God and I got close. I chose him and he chose me. Second question is, what advice would you give to a lady who thinks she's run out of time to pursue her dreams? Whew, that's a difficult one because I'm 28. I'm turning 29. But I'll be 29 by the time you probably watch this. But what advice would I give? I think I'm realizing that time is such an interesting concept. And in as much as it bears so much weight because it's probably the most expensive commodity, it is also something that doesn't have the restrictions or barriers that we think that it has. I was having a conversation with Zoraida. I'm going to call her a friend of mine because I decided on the day that I spoke to her. But I was having a conversation with Zoraida, and she was telling me how she started following her dreams. And when she got to LA and left it all, there were different classes for different people. People wanted to start acting at 50, some who wanted to start at 40, ballet classes for people at 50, 40, 60. And I remember a story about Susan Boyle, the singer who went, I think it was X Factor or The Voice UK. One of those was Simon Cowell. But she went on there and became an overnight sensation. But she followed her dreams irrespective of like what people thought the age restrictions were to becoming a star, or the age restrictions were to following your dreams. And I'll be honest, there's times where I hold myself back because I think, no, I don't have enough time. Oh my God, I'm almost 30. What does this mean? Do I still have enough time for this and time for that? But the truth is there is no time limit to our dreams. I think the world just imposes those standards and barriers onto us to hold us back, to keep us in a loop of what if. And the what ifs are, I feel like the what ifs are the things that hold us back even further from being happy. A true measure of success is happiness. And I think when we pursue our dreams, when I think about my dreams, I always pray that my dreams are in alignment with God's will for me. And God's will for me is what drives me. So whatever dreams I have, I know I have an inherent understanding that those dreams come straight from God into my heart and into my soul. And when I dream, I understand that certain dreams and certain passions are not just that, they're gifts, and gifts that we must pursue. So if you have a dream or a purpose that you feel like you need to fulfill, one thing that I've learned, especially being in the States, is that there is no age limit to following your dreams. Even if it means you following it at whatever age you think is too old to follow it. Those are barriers, I think, projections from people who never got to pursue their dreams because they didn't have the courage to, or they were too scared of failure. And now it's been imposed and I guess passed down from generation to generation to keep us in survival mode and not really pursue the dreams that we have in order to thrive. So I don't think there's an age limit. So don't hold yourself back. Third question is, I feel like I no longer trust myself to start and rebuild something. How do I rebuild? This one is interesting because, a few years ago, I started a company. I called it Tomani. And the reason why I called it Tomani means start, just start. And I've had different panels where I've had young people. It's so strange for me to say young people because I'm young myself, but I had young people feeling like they have to start now, but even in starting, they didn't know where to start because it feels like they are building something that is so personal, that is aligned with their dreams, but has a high, I guess, probability of failure. And as they were speaking, it was quite interesting to me because I just started thinking about how life would be so different if I just didn't force myself to start over and over again. And by that, I mean, I read a book. The book is by, I think it's The Psychology of Money. The Psychology of Money and Ego, or Ego's the Enemy, one of the two. But it always speaks about always being a student. But always being a student, to me, means the ability to adapt and to rebuild when necessary. I think the key word is pivot. And pivoting, rebuilding, and being a student are things that, to me, are very much under the same thread because they require a lot of courage. They require understanding what your why is in wanting to start or build that specific thing. And if you are to rebuild your life, because this question is very broad, but if you are to rebuild your life or rebuild a relationship, what is your why in that rebuilding? So if it's a relationship that has crumbled and you'd like to rebuild it, it's like taking stock of what has happened, what you'd like to happen, and why. But if it's your life, it's never too late to start again. I can tell you that. It's never too late to bet on yourself again. And I know trusting yourself is so hard. I think I learned that trusting myself is so hard when I started losing relationships around me. I started having conversations with myself where a lot of the trust within myself was lost because of the things that I had allowed in my life. So it also requires taking accountability for what has happened. It also requires taking accountability for your role in what has happened and your role in you having to rebuild. Because I think trust in oneself is conversation with yourself to take stock of what you, or the role that you have played that resulted in the lack of trust in yourself. And most of the time, yes, it's not your fault, but sometimes that acknowledgement makes the biggest difference because any courage that we need, any forgiveness that we need, usually when people rebuild, that's what's happened, but any courage that we need, any stock taking that we need requires forgiveness of yourself if you've let yourself be in a place where you trusted and you ended up being hurt or losing everything. So I think trusting yourself requires the courage to try just one more time, always just one more time. So, and forgiveness, to forgive yourself for the things that didn't go right, even if it wasn't your fault. Sometimes it's really important to have those conversations with yourself. How do you reclaim your power in the presence of someone who bullied you? This one is quite interesting because I was bullied for so many years, as many of you know. I mean, I've written two children's books about it and I speak about it a lot. But being bullied was such an interesting experience because I remember the first time I stood up to one of my bullies. I'm not going to say her name. It was over the phone. We were in a group chat and I think I was 14 years old. And it felt so good to finally stand up for myself, but I was so scared of what would happen if I had to see them in person. Fast forward to 2016 or 2017, I found myself in the same university as one of my bullies. And I think what was interesting about it was because she was being so nice to me, like nothing happened. But I'm thinking, I live with what you've done to me. And you may think it's a joke, but you have changed the trajectory of my life as I know it. You have changed the way that I look at myself in the mirror. You have changed the way that I show up as a person because I'm constantly anxious, and I'm in a place where I think my boundaries have been so violated that I don't even know how to show up in the world. And to you, because we were young, you just move and you think it's a joke. But for me, it wasn't a joke. And I said it, like I mentioned it because I just couldn't be like all lovey-dovey or even joking around with a person who had violated my boundaries in that way. And when I mentioned it, she said, "Oh, no, you were just our little sister. So we were just playing around and messing around with you. It wasn't a big deal." But when she said that, it was quite interesting. I just, like, that little giggle where that was the first time I realized that it was never about me. But it didn't change the fact that that little giggle really annoyed me in that moment. Yes, I was proud of the fact that I actually spoke up. Yes, I was proud of the fact that I actually said something. But it was then that I had to understand that bullying is more a reflection of the person who's doing it. And it was never about me because I think I placed so much importance on myself and made it about me, made it about it being a reflection of me, made it about putting a mirror in my face to see what about me makes me a target. What about me makes me a victim? What about me made you do that to me? But I had to change my mindset because I was only holding myself back. And I think how I reclaimed my presence, or rather my power, was understanding that I've given these people way too much power. And fast forward again, this was around 2016, 2017, I had 3 other bullies who, when I started speaking about my bullying experience, this is after 2020, a lot of them, 2 of them apologized to me and understood the gravity of what they had done. But what was interesting was because of the experience in 2016 or 2017, I'd already forgiven them. And the forgiveness was not for them, it was for me. And when I reclaimed my power, it was also not giving them the privilege of being around me in that way or having access to me in that way. Because people choose to forget, not that they've forgotten or they don't know. I think they just choose to forget. And I know bullying goes across the spectrum because I've had family that's been bullied at work. I know a lot of people that have had to quit jobs because they've been bullied. Switch schools. I switched schools. And it's not easy, but I think the less you give that person access and understand that it's not about you, and the more you speak up, that's how you reclaim your power. So for children at school, for adults at work, the more you speak up and take tabs, the better. I actually saw a TikTok of a young woman who started taking tabs on a senior colleague that had been bullying her for a while. And then she started taking tabs. She didn't react at all. And then eventually when she reported it, she had about 3 incidences that she could report. And when she did, they started looking at her very differently because had she reacted in that moment or in those moments, things would have been very different. And had she taken it personally, things would have been very different. But she knew the power that she had, and she didn't react, she responded when the time was right. So this is for adults, I guess, when you are being bullied at work or in any environment, just understanding that responding appropriately and taking tabs, you do have the power now. You're not the young or little girl, little boy anymore. And for parents whose children are being bullied, it's really important to listen to them when they speak and to not just say, toughen up, or not give them the space to really listen, but also creating environments where they feel like they can tell you. I think for the most part, I didn't want to tell my mom because I felt like she was stressed out enough. as it is. But it should have never been my responsibility to take on that role of worrying about a parent when I'm only 9 years old, you know? And to no fault of her own, I'm realizing now that now that I'm older and reading a lot more books around these things, that the environments that we create become the make or break, especially for children that are being bullied. So yeah, so that's my answer to that. And what do you say to yourself? That's the next question. When you don't feel like waking up to build your goals. This is quite an interesting one because for the most part, it's not what I say to myself. I'll be very honest. I don't want to act like I've got it all together. I just tell myself I have no choice, hey? It's a very toxic thing, I guess. But on days where I just have zero motivation, on days where I don't want to get out of bed, on days where, yeah, I just tell myself I have no choice. And then I also allocate, depending on how I'm feeling and how long I've been feeling that way for. I seek help, obviously, from my therapist if it persists for a long time. But if it's just general stress, I allow myself a few hours in a day or a day where I'm allowed to feel sorry for myself or allow myself to dwell in those emotions, especially where work is concerned, and especially where life is concerned. I think the hardest thing is realizing that irrespective of like how you're feeling, life goes on with or without you. And that has been quite tough for me because from a health perspective, I realized that. From a heartbreak perspective, I've realized that. From a career and stress perspective, I've realized that. And school has added another layer to that. So when I don't feel like waking up to build my goals, I think I think about future me and how I want future me to feel. I think about the kind of life that I want future me to have. But I also think about the pleasure I feel or the pride in myself that I feel once I've achieved something. And it's also just understanding that like a bad day doesn't mean a bad life. But if you allow a bad day to take over your life and become bad days and not do anything about it, that's how you build a bad life. So on those days when I don't feel like waking up, it's also just understanding that like these goals are not going to build themselves and I actually have no choice but to achieve my goals because it's for future me. It's for future me and I cannot have future me feeling like this or feeling like I didn't do enough because I just let too many bad days stay like that and I didn't do anything to try and get better if it is my mental health or if it is just a lack of motivation, get out of bed and do something for 30 minutes that will be a small win that builds up to bigger wins, you know? And I know for a lot of people, it's easier said than done because sometimes it has to do with our mental health. Sometimes it has to do with the fact that we actually do need medical support or psychological support, which is why it's important to seek help in that way. But for those that can't afford that kind of luxury, it's also important to have a community. We don't exist in vacuums. And most of the time, there's times where you can't be the person to say something to you, to encourage you to build your goals. So also building the village and having a board of directors for your life who will remind you of the weight of your goals, but also your why, the why behind your goals. And this is where having people who understand you comes in and the right people who know how to say the right things at the right time. So that village is quite important in terms of also just having motivation to just get up. And also just having someone to be around, even if it's quiet. The nearness of them makes the biggest difference and encourages you to just be a better version of yourself. So yeah, the next question, has the impact surpassed the goal or is there still work to be done? There's still work to be done. I think the goal is to change the world, man. That's the goal. Um, and for the most part, it feels like the world is regressing in so many ways that never again are happening as we speak. Um, so if the goal or the impact is to be of service to humanity, I'm still very far from that. There's so much that we can do. There's so many people who we can encourage to understand that I think that's the fundamental thing about being human, to be of service to one another, and to be of service to ourselves, obviously, because we can't pour from an empty cup. But yeah, I think the impact has not surpassed the goal because the goal is bigger than me. Yeah, the goal is bigger than my existence. The goal is to ensure that we lift others as we rise. And until we've got the resources and the ability to do that, and we can sit at certain tables and make sure that people have a voice or allowed seats at the table, yeah, the goal is way bigger than me. So I don't think the impact has surpassed the goal in any way. How do you juggle everything and stay calm? I'm never calm. How do I juggle everything and stay calm? I am never calm. I think the only time when I'm calm is when I'm watching K-dramas. Yeah, when I'm watching K-dramas, that's the only time when I can say that I am calm. But how do I juggle everything and stay calm? I don't. I actually don't stay calm. And the only times I find myself feeling calm is when I can shut my brain off, because I am an overthinker. So K-dramas. I'm actually rewatching one right now that I watched 3 years ago. And the reason I watch it is because for a second, or not for a second, an episode is an hour, 15 minutes. So for those however many hours, my brain is not working. And that's the only time I think I am calm. I think I'm in my building phase. I'm in my building phase, and it's uncomfortable almost every single day. I feel like I am at wit's end every other day. I'm at wit's end every other day. And yeah, I think the only thing that keeps me calm, or even if it's a 10% calm, let me say that, is understanding that the work today and what I'm sowing today will reap. I will reap something bigger than myself in a few years. So no, I don't stay calm. I juggle everything and understand where I need to get to, and just keep going and just have healthy habits around me. So the habits that I have would then be gym. So on days where my nerves or my anxiety are doing the most, I go to yoga, I go to the gym, I go to Soul Cycle, I do something, I move my body and just get that out of me. So perhaps the answer is gym. That's how I stay calm while I'm juggling everything. I just need to release it somehow. And gym has become my healthy habit. But K-dramas honestly are on my guilty pleasure that makes me smile and makes me giddy. So yeah, that's how I do it. The next question is, which book would you recommend to your 21-year-old self? The book that I would recommend to my 21-year-old self would have to be Start With Why. Start With Why or The Psychology of Money. I have something to say actually around those books, but one in particular, The Psychology of Money. Financial literacy is something that needs to be taught in high schools and primary schools. When I was reading that book and how it speaks about how we should interact with money, it was so important because I feel like that's something a 21-year-old should know, especially when they go into the workplace or start building or start making any sort of money. So the psychology of money is really big for me because we need to learn financial literacy, and that should be a fundamental life teaching or life lesson. And secondly, we need to understand the importance of investing instead of just like blowing money, really. So 21-year-old me I would tell her to read The Psychology of Money and start with why is important, because I think a lot of us have great ideas, but we just don't know how to execute them or how to communicate them. I think about great ideas and starting with why as like a 2-minute, 3-minute pitch if you had the access. Because I was on a panel and we were speaking about networking and your networks. But even your networks, if they had to ask you, advise you, you need to be able to articulate what it is that you're doing. And it always starts with why. It's not what you're doing, but why are you doing it? How will you do it? So you start with why, what, how, those questions are really important. But I think a lot of us have big dreams and big ideas that we just don't know how to articulate because we've never really been given the tools to know how to articulate them. The idea of the elevator pitch is still more important now than ever, because if you don't know how to sell it, most of the time it's very difficult for it to get anywhere unless you've got you've got people around you who can do that. Like I was reading a story about an inventor who had someone that could sell his product, but he would stay in the background actually making the product because that person needed to articulate what it is, why it was created, and how it will work, So those are the 2 books I wish I read earlier. I read Start With Why when I was 24, literally a week or 2 weeks before I won Miss South Africa. And that helped me define why I wanted to speak about mental health, what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it. And the interesting thing is I've been doing that for the last 5 years, even beyond whatever platforms I'm given. And the other book that I read was Psychology of Money, but I only read that a year ago. And as I was reading it, there were so many lessons in there that I wish I knew when I was 21. So those are the 2 books, Start With Why and The Psychology of Money. What is something that I've learned? What is something that I've learned about myself recently? Something that I've learned about myself recently is that discipline is important to me. That when I am disciplined, I am at my best. And whatever disrupts that discipline, I need to be able to walk away from it. And I've realized that I'm not as disciplined as I'd like to be, but I'm getting there. I think it's the awareness of moments where I slip off and become undisciplined that I can call myself out. But I'm getting there. I'd like to be disciplined and say confidently that I'm a disciplined person, but I think I'm a work in progress. So that's something that I've learned about myself recently. And I think I'm so determined. I'm so determined because, why am I so determined? I actually don't know why I'm so determined. I'm so determined because I know how many people worked so hard for me to get to where I am. How many people wish they had the dreams. How many people wish, I guess, prayed for the life that I live now. And I am merely a manifestation of those dreams, I guess, in human form. And I say this because of my mother and how hard she worked to make me understand freedom and how to value freedom. I say this because of my grandmother and my grandfather, my grandfather worked as a gardener. My grandmother was a domestic worker, and they managed to put their children through school. And because they did that, I get to live the life that I live. So I think my determination is understanding the weight of my goals, is understanding the blessing that I'm currently living in. I'm also so determined because I realize that I am truly my ancestors' wildest dreams. So yeah, I think that's why I'm so determined. I like this next question. It's, what's the one thing that people misunderstand about you? To be very honest, I think the one thing that people misunderstand about me is that because I'm an introvert, they think I'm not nice. People think I'm not nice because I'm an introvert. Like, I remember when I was Miss South Africa, there was an event I went to. And I remember I was chatting to this gentleman while I was there, and my manager was right next to me. And we spoke until there was nothing to speak about. I promise you, we had a lovely conversation. There was nothing else to speak about. But because I didn't force the conversation and I had nothing else to say, this man went to my manager and said that I'm rude. I had people complain about me, all because I just don't know how to speak when I've got nothing to say. Big crowds overwhelm me. Like, they really, really overwhelm me. And I know how to do small talk, but to a point. I think I know I wear my heart on my sleeve, and there's so many things that interest me, and there's so many conversations that I like having, and I'm very good at probing a lot. But in that specific instance, I looked around me and my brain started doing the math. We're at an event, it is loud. We've had a lovely conversation, but we are done. I just didn't understand how me not forcing a conversation equates to me being rude because you're not trying, I'm not trying because we've already spoken. And that's just how my brain works, right? And there's so many instances where I also just believe in the fundamental respect of one another as human beings, where, people also expect you to accept when they are not nice to you. And when people are nice to me and it's in a professional setting and I don't know what to do, I just distance myself. But I've just realized that there's this, I read this book that actually made me feel better about myself. It's Quiet by Cain. And she said, we live in a world where introverts are expected to aspire to extroverted ideals in order to fit in. You see this in every industry. When I was a model, they like the bubbly model. They like the model that makes everyone laugh, everyone, feel good. I was watching a different show yesterday, actually, and it speaks about, it's for cheerleaders, right? And how their manifesto is, I am to bore no one. I am courteous. That's your name. It has these weird expectations of human beings and how they should show up and how they have to be on all the time. How they have to be on all the time and how they have to smile at everyone and how they have to be so bubbly. And I think a part of me has wondered if those expectations are only meant for women. And if men were in the same settings that we've been in, if they would be expected to call themselves courteous by saying, I'm a bore to no one, which means you must be entertaining to everyone at all times. And I don't know, I just feel like that's not sustainable. I'm veering off here, but I think people misunderstand introverts a lot. And people misunderstand that not everyone knows how to be on a lot. Because what happens is then, you find yourself, I had to find myself having to be on and pretending all the time in situations where, if we just sat down and had a heart-to-heart, I really believe that 10 minutes of a quality conversation beats an hour of nothingness. It beats an hour of sitting there speaking about something that you will not remember and something that I will not remember. But then there's the 10 minutes we could have had where we really, really connected, and maybe at a later stage had conversations again. And maybe at a later stage when we see each other, build rapport and have a lot more conversations. But I just think we really have unrealistic expectations of one another when it comes to socializing. We think everyone must be the same. And I'm very uncomfortable with that. Really, really uncomfortable. I know how to chat, but I also just don't know how to waste your time when I have nothing to say because I zone out. And then I just start giving you generic answers. And I believe that the human experience is so important that we should really listen to one another. I always speak about how when we say, how are you to each other, we should actually take the time to listen to how the person is actually doing. Because I think we always say I'm fine because that's the answer that makes everyone feel comfortable. But we never really leave room and time and space for the opposite of that. But I think we just live in a world where we just have so many conversations, meaningless conversations. And we wonder why, like someone can't say, I'm not fine, because the world is about making each other comfortable. And that makes me very uncomfortable. So I think that's something that's misunderstood about me. I'm actually a very nice person, if I have to say so myself. But what I cannot do is to pretend to be something that I'm not, which is an extrovert. I'm really not an extrovert. It's exhausting. And I guess this then goes with the next question, which is, how have my goals clashed with people's expectations of me? I think they've clashed in many ways. I think about how I am a sister, I am a daughter, I am a friend, I am a partner, I'm so many things to so many people, that the moment where my goals need me to just zone in on me, it feels like I have failed at all those other expectations. The moment where my work comes into play and it absolutely consumes me, then I have failed at those expectations. So I think the current goals that I'm living in right now, I mean, I moved to New York, I moved countries to follow my goals. And every single day feels like I'm failing at everything that I've left behind. And I feel like even before I came back to South Africa, I was exhausted, I guess, at the possibility of all the roles that I still had to assume when I came back, because you just expected to plug and play. In many instances, I think I've just been very lucky to have, I guess, an understanding tribe around me, and an understanding group of people who I call my loved ones. But I think my goals have clashed with the expectations of those roles, missing birthdays, missing matric dances. I had to miss my sister's matric dance because I was at school. I had to miss one of my friend's traditional weddings. I went to the white wedding, but I had to miss a traditional wedding because I was working. And because of my family dynamics and because of the goals that I have, there's certain things that I just can't allow myself to miss, and certain goals that I cannot afford to not achieve. So yeah, I think it has definitely had a few clashes. And I guess I can just segue into the last question, which is, does it get better? All of it. Does it get better? No, I think we just get better. I think we just become stronger. We just become stronger. I don't think it gets better. I really don't think it gets better, because the higher up you move, be it in your career, or the more you are in a relationship, or the older you grow, there's just so much more responsibility and so much more growth that needs to happen, and so many conversations that you don't necessarily only have with yourself, but with how you interact with other people. It feels like there's a constant mirror in front of us, right? And there are different choices that we need to make, and there's certain conversations that we need to have with ourselves, where I don't think it gets better. I think in terms of the pressures, I'd say that they get worse. But what gets better is us, the investments we put into ourselves, the conversations we have with ourselves, the steps we take to learn. I think always being a student is probably one of my life mottos, because being a student allows you to be adaptable, to learn how to be better, to understand your mind better, to understand yourself better. And in turn, constantly putting a mirror in front of you in the interactions that you have, in how you respond to stress. I was asked, how do I juggle everything and stay calm? I don't think I stay calm, but I think I understand what would trigger my stress and cause me to be not calm. So for example, one of the things that I would do at school is, I know I don't want to be stressed out during the week, so I'd rather get all my work done that I need to do, all my deadlines that I need to submit on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, sometimes even Thursday, done over the weekend. So whatever's added on to that new week is for the next week, if that makes sense. So I'm not chasing deadlines. I'm not, scrambling to finish something or working until the final hour. Yeah. So it's learning to manage yourself better that makes things better or makes you better equipped to handle life's pressures. So yeah, those were, I think, 13 questions. 13 questions with me. I want to do this a lot more often because sometimes, we miss so many things, and I know there's so many conversations that I'd like to have, and I did not answer every single question, but I will try to make time for it. And it's such a beautiful process to get to a place where we answer these questions, because I've realized that a lot that has to do with mental health comes from these daily things that we go through on a daily basis, these daily triggers, our inability to manage our stress, our inability to have boundaries. Poor boundaries, I think, are the foundation of so many things that go wrong in our lives. And I think that's what Mindful Mondays, or what I wanted it to be about, because, we did it on Instagram. We did the definitions. We did the education around what each thing is. But how do we actually put it into practice in our businesses, in our lives, in our relationships, in our friendships, in our conversations with ourselves? And I think tea time, I guess, or questions that you'd ask me during tea time, keep them coming, because I want to answer a lot more of these questions in relation to what mindfulness actually is in our daily lives, the steps that we'd need to take. I joke about the K-drama as something that keeps me calm, but I was speaking to my therapist around how my life just became so engrossed with my work and with school and running this and doing that. And then she asked me, what is it that you do for yourself? And it was tough to answer. And then I realized that K-dramas are something that I do for myself, something that is so selfish because, I don't even understand it, but it makes me so happy. It's my guilty pleasure. So yeah, keep the questions coming. I want to do this at least 3 times in a season. 3 times in a season. But I hope this was helpful. I hope it's let you into my brain a little bit more. And let's have a lot more conversations. Thank you.